Hello, all you sexy dadders out there. We are Sexy Dad Jokes. This is episode 15. We're sort of breaking protocol, if you will, today because a bunch of kids just got shot up in Texas, and I just don't have it in me to deliver any dad jokes right now. Uh, I can't comprehend what happened. I'm struggling with it. And what I'd like to do is have just an open, real, vulnerable conversation to help us all process the senselessness that has happened and in our everlasting journey to be the best men that we can be, to understand the role that toxic masculinity has played in bringing us to where we're at right now. So I know we're usually a bunch of laughs, and we have a lot of fun, but we as men have to be able to take on serious topics as well. So that's what we're going to try to do today. So thanks for watching, and don't really know how this is going to go, but welcome. And we had a great show planned for you, and you'll still get that show next time. But right now,
Coming soon.
this is why we do what we do. We love the dad jokes. We love the skits. Josh, you're just so talented and wonderful at it. This Square 50s guy is just a barrel full of laughs, and really
We gotta love him too.
we
Just
gotta
like
love
our
him
favorite
too.
redheaded stepchild, we just gotta love him too.
But
Thanks, creatures.
as men, we're here to challenge ourselves, and we need to be willing to have the hard conversations as well. Anything y'all want to add, fellas?
What I
Yeah.
could say is, go ahead, Johnny.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that it's always important to get things off your chest, to speak freely, to sometimes have the more serious sit down talks, but it's best to always never do it alone. We got the four of us here, those here watching and listening. You got us. And also, all four of us, we're not alone either. We have probably the most mature person of the STJ group who's waiting in the wings to help keep us afloat with
Yes,
this serious matter.
we do have a guest here with us today. But Johnny Spaz, I wanted to give you a chance to say something as you were about to say something there.
Oh no, I was just going to reinforce what Josh was saying.
Okay. All right. Well, to help us with this conversation, we actually had him booked up for this, and we appreciate you being willing to be nimble with us here. But he is a director of the Inland Northwest Compassionate Mind Center. He's got a new book out called Experiencing Compassion Focused Therapy from the Inside Out. And he is one of the world's most renowned experts on compassion focused therapy, so much so that he gave a TEDx talk on it. Please welcome back to the show on SDJ, Dr. Russell Kolts.
Woo!
Thanks for having me back, guys.
It's good to have you.
You forgot
Yes.
to mention he's an honest to God American.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
It actually is really helping me today to be here with you. It's been a rough day for me, as with a lot of us, I think.
Yeah.
And just to quickly summarize, over the past 2 weeks, I believe, we've had 2 mass shootings, one in Buffalo where 10 were
Three.
killed at a top supermarket. Just gosh, was it yesterday?
It
Well,
was
we're
yesterday.
recording on Wednesday, May 25th. Just recently, 19 young children and 2 teachers were killed in a school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And I don't know why. I don't understand it. I don't understand how someone could get to the point in life where the thing that makes sense to do is to go shoot up a school. I just don't understand it. And there's people are talking about a lot of different things, gun control. We just did a whole saga on video games, where people sit down and the whole point of the game is to shoot up a bunch of people. Mental health. I don't understand it. I don't have the answers, and that's why I wanted to just open it up and have a conversation about it. Maybe we can try to come to some understanding, because all of us in this room do a lot of thinking about things like this, and specifically with sexy dad jokes from the perspective of toxic masculinities, because we are men who strive to be the best we can be. And that means eschewing toxicity, rejecting it in favor of something that is productive and breathes life into us, that is compassionate and not about hate and anger. What goes in the minds of these shooters? How could you get so warped? Like, normally, okay, so there are people who get to a point of hopelessness and despair, so much so that they feel like their best course of action is to take their own life, suicide. And that is tragic. But they're not going off and shooting up a school, shooting up a supermarket. What is happening to those who feel like that is their best course of action? And I think my own feeling is maybe it's like people who are feeling this hopelessness and despair, but then introducing this whole other element of anger and hate. And when you bring that all together and you mix it into a cocktail, you get this madness. And goodness, there is a lot of anger and hate to go around these days. I'm going to stop there. What do y'all think?
I think a lot of things, because I have an interesting perspective on this. Not interesting in that I think other people will find it interesting. Interesting to me that I come from the culture that won't pass any laws and about it because they're afraid people are going to take their guns. I've also been on the other side of that now, where I'm a school teacher with exactly the age group that this was, and I know 20 kids by face and name. Like, I have they come up to me and hug me and tell me they love me. Like, and I'm just walking around. When they see me, their eyes like saucers and they get emotional. It's like when a dog's really happy to see you, but a human. And I've also, a lifelong member of the NRA. I was also a weapons specialist in the military. I've also used these guns for their purpose. I've also trained people how to use them. And I feel like I have good insight into what, and I don't, right now, my thought, I'll just cut to the chase. Take all the fucking guns away. Ban them. I don't care. If I had my guns on this side of the room and a human baby on that side, and someone said you can have one or the other, just who goes over here to the gun? If that's the kind of person that is, then maybe we, instead of banning abortion, we should ban that kind of person from being able to associate themselves with our community as a human. The point is, if you can't honestly say to yourself, what's more important to me, the children of other people or my gun, you have a mental issue to work out, in my opinion.
It's sort of a combination between what's going on in your head and ready access to weapons, easy access.
Yeah. And I fought myself out of that culture, Ben, kicking and screaming, dragged out of it. So I know how hard it is for people to just break free from that. I spent $100,000 on an education in psych for a job that I never wanted. Okay. Like, who does that? Am I an idiot? Maybe it wasn't a smart decision, but I stand by it. I'll pay the money off sometime between now and my death. I don't really care that much about it. So when it comes to something important, like working through your decisions on something basic like human life or inanimate object, the problem isn't the gun. The problem is the whole, what do we value in our society that it would end up to where that is possible? I think it's deeper than, take the fucking stupid guns away. What else are we going to do? If alcohol becomes a problem where every 3 minutes there was a drunk driving accident everywhere in the entire United States, we would just ban alcohol. It wouldn't be a thought process. But because you add something that people attach their identity to it, you're attacking them. And look at what their behavior is. Does that track? Think to yourself, does that track? I'm not saying that's the call. I'm just saying there's something deeper there, and the problem isn't getting solved because we're fixing a leak in a part of the pipe where the leak is not located.
Dr. Kolts, I saw on your social media you posted this interesting chart about the readiness and the accessibility of weapons in America in particular.
Yeah, well, the chart, I copied it off somebody else, but it was just a graph, and it was a scatter plot. And on the up and down axis, it had the number of mass shootings between 1967 and 2012. And on the flat axis, the x-axis that, goes across, it had the number of guns. And this was from, it ended at 2012. So this is a long time ago. And what it showed is that, all the other countries, all the other industrialized countries in the world were in the lower left corner. They had, relatively few guns compared to us because, they were in the 0 to 50 million guns and very few mass shootings. And then you looked at up in the right-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner, you see that red dot with the United States. And that's, lots of mass shootings, and it's, almost 300 million guns. And so, this is, any scientist will tell you correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because these two things co-vary or go together, it doesn't mean that the guns cause the shootings happen. But I think it's pretty clear that it's a critical element. They enable it. We don't see, people, we should talk about mental illness. We should talk about working with emotions. I want to talk about toxic masculinity. Johnny brought up some points that I think are really important. If we really want to understand why this happens, I think we need to think about how men deal with their emotions and what they allow themselves to feel and how they work to feel strong. But it's the combination of that struggle with emotions, because men all over the world struggle with these emotions. There are cultures in which the masculine gender norms are even stricter than there are here in terms of emotion. So there are men all over the world. And I say men because that's who does the mass shootings. I don't even know if there are any female mass shooters, maybe one or two. And some of your listeners will say, well, there was this person. There probably is one. But they're almost exclusively men. And yet, men all over the world have these emotional challenges, but all over the world you don't see these mass shootings. So it's the combination of the emotional stuff and the easy access to guns. Now, I don't want to, I only read a couple articles, so I don't want to pretend like I'm an authority of what happened in Texas. But the couple articles I read indicated that this I say kid, he's an adult. He just turned 18 not so long ago, and apparently, like moments or days after he turned 18, he was able to go out and buy an AR-15 or two, and like 300 and some pieces of ammunition, multiple 30-round magazines, and that feels wrong to me. That feels wrong because 18-year-olds, I don't know if you remember when you were 18, but my emotions were all over the place when I was 18.
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever intended to have a mass shooting, but when you combine all that volatile emotionality and all the things that we struggle with easy access to weapons that can kill a lot of people very rapidly, I think that's a toxic combination. I think it's a recipe, because if you look at all the other countries, every other country, every other industrialized nation in the world, they have a lot of the same challenges we have. The one thing they don't have is they don't have the guns.
Yeah.
And they don't have the mass shootings. And so people can point at this or point at that, but it feels like the writing is on the wall, that's part of the story. And I was sharing with you before we went on the air, I'm an Oklahoma kid, right? Everyone I knew, I grew up with hunted. So I've not been like an anti-gun activist my whole life. I'm not, I think probably if you're eat meat, hunting is probably the most ethical way to do it. But we've got a problem here, and we've got to acknowledge that guns are a critical element of that we need to do something about.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And to backtrack, Russell, on something that you said, but it made me think of when the people say assault rifles, we'll just say the left. If we're going to split it left versus right, left for gun or left against guns, right for guns, right? And you took the terminology on how people classify things, and since it's attached to their identity, in my opinion, like there's a bridge there between how they end up and so positioned in this and resistant.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's actually some interesting data on threat sensitivity and political leanings. Interestingly enough, Johnny, since you brought up right and left, there are several studies that show, and it's kind of interesting. If you'll indulge me for just a second, if you look at how sensitive people are to threat, how easily they feel threatened, right? Feel unsafe, feel angry, feel anxious. You can predict political affiliation. So people on the right biologically have a stronger threat response than you see people who lean left. And more than that, what you see, there's research in an area called mortality salience, which is a fancy way of saying get people to think about the fact they're going to die. And when you get someone to think about the fact they're going to die, their political leanings in the moment shift. Right. And these are averages, right? So if you get the people way on the right or way on the left, probably you're not going to see much difference. But there was a study, I believe it was when John Kerry and George Bush were running for president, and they surveyed the participants to ask them which way they were leaning, and the majority of people were leaning John Kerry, who was the Democrat, the left-wing leaning candidate. And then they did the mortality salience intervention, and they had people think about the fact that one day they're going to die. Right, which for most of us brings up a little threat. And what happened is it shifted, and then the majority said, no, Bush. Right. So I think what you're seeing is that threat is involved in this. Right. When people feel threatened, And this is why I think part of it is about identity. But one of you mentioned values earlier. What do we care about? What are we about? What do we mean? What do we stand for? And those are the kind of questions we contemplate when we feel safe, right? Like in therapy, I want to help people feel safe in their relationship with me so they can begin to access that sort of thinking, that broader,
Yeah.
kind of more flexible thinking, like, what do I want my life to be about?
Yeah.
But what happens when we feel threatened, when we feel scared or angry, is that everything narrows in to whatever the threat is. And
Yeah.
particularly when we don't know how to soothe very well, when we're not good at connecting with others and helping ourselves feel safe, we tend to rely on dominance strategies. We tend to try to do other things to help us feel safe, like threat regulation strategies. And so from my perspective as a psychologist, I see buying bunches of guns as a threat regulation strategy.
Mm.
Right? I'm buying a bunch of guns because
Yeah.
I've asked my fam. Again, I grew up in rural Oklahoma, so I've had these conversations with my high school classmates, and I'd say, I know that these guys have like arsenals, right? Some of them. And I said, what's with all the guns? Why do you guys buy? Why do you need 17 AR-15? And they respond, I mean, because it's a lot, right? And the
Well, I have a
response is,
response to that. I have a response because of those types of people, and it's just I don't want to interrupt you. It's funny.
well,
though,
I want to be
because
careful, using types of people, because the folks I'm talking about are also people who would do anything
types of
for
thought
you.
process. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a thought process, but these are kind people. They're
Right.
giving people. They're caring people. They're not people who are in any way okay with what's happening in these shootings. But I ask, and they're like, "Well, I got to protect my family." And I say, "Well, how many times have you had to use your guns to protect your family?" And the answer is, "Well, never, but it could happen." And of course, I'm like, well, do you have any other friends that have all these guns? And they say, well, yeah, I mean, everybody I know has these. Well, how many of them do you know that have had to use their guns to protect their families? And they're like, maybe, I don't, I guess nobody, but you never know. And I'm like, well, do you know anyone who's like a family member, or someone has been hurt through a gun accident, through the gun? And usually they can remember someone for that, but they feel it, even though they can't come up with an instance in which they needed those guns to protect themselves, even if they couldn't say why an AR-15 would be better at that than like a shotgun, right? Which seems like it would logically, you don't have to aim quite as well, right? If you're going to do home protection, it might, I don't know. But even though they can't come up with that, they feel it. They feel the threat, and there's this conviction, I need this. It's like it just helps them regulate threat, right? When I have these guns, I feel a little less threatened. Right. And I
That's
think,
so
Johnny, you hit
interesting.
something else. It becomes a part of identity too. I think Johnny hit something really important too, which is this is something that's a part of my identity, something I identify with, some part of how I see myself. So the suggestion that you, for example, might not be able to have those AR-15s, it feels like a personal attack. It's not a let's address a gun problem. It's a you're coming after me. Like there's a fusion between my idea of me and these weapons. And I think that, that's why I love your show so much, because I think the only way to combat that is to help people kind of reconfigure their idea of me and what that means. And Johnny, I think you must have done that, because you talk about your history with these weapons and stuff. And
let me say this. Not only was I trained by the military for this, so I lived with my weapons for 3 years. I got to my permanent duty station September 1st, 2001. So 10 days was all I experienced out of 4 years. The following 3 years, sorry. Yeah. 10 days of the following 3 years, I had 1 year of training. So it was, my whole time was spent with a rifle. I felt protected. I felt like I couldn't live without it.
Where'd you put your guns while you were sleeping?
Wherever I had quick access where I wouldn't also blow my own head off. Accidentally in my sleep.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, isn't it? If they're going to be readily accessed, they can't. It's hard to have them also well secured.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, to be honest, I would have one in my bedroom in a space where I knew I wouldn't accidentally discharge it in my sleep. where I could access it upon waking up. And then everything else was locked up, you know, because that was life routine for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I was already grew up with guns. I mean, we weren't right wing, crazy political into any of that stuff. Like, we just had guns. My grandpa was a hunter. My dad and I, it was a bonding thing. It was one of the few things I ever did with my dad that I enjoyed. Okay. And it was like, so it's that emotional level. It's like, you can't, who's going to shit on that? No, I'm going to bite your head off at the first most inconceivably unoffensive thing you say, you know?
Yeah. And I think maybe that is part of what underlies the sort of slippery slope theory that always seems to enter in when we have these conversations too, because I think people equate doing anything with you coming after my identity.
Hmm.
Right.
I think that's why it's so easy for people to pick on trans and LGBTQ community, because they don't identify with them in any way.
Yeah.
And
Identity.
that's a fear building thing. That's innate, I would say, to some degree. There's, you know, the concept of feeling something like almost at a primal level. You know?
Yeah.
Instinctual. It's more innate than
It's core to our very beings, identity. Dr. Kolts, I think you're really like nailing it on the head on what are the factors at play here. This lack of a sense of safety and trust, that to the point where someone feels like, to feel safe, I need to arm up. And that is uniquely American, because that comes along with the uniquely American value of rugged individualism, which feeds gloriously into toxic masculinity. This whole notion of you got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and if you just work hard, keep your head down, the American dream is yours. But we all know that's a lie. We know that the system's rigged against us. The system is designed to keep us oppressed.
now,
And so traditionally we find safety by building community. That's how we've evolved as a species. But what rugged individualism does, it's every man for himself. How can you possibly find safety in that?
Well, it's interesting. I think what you're saying relates a lot. You know, I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but I'll say it again because I think it's pertinent. You may have heard, you know, if you can't beat them, join them. Right? That's kind of an old saying. Everyone's heard that.
yeah.
I don't think that's how it works at all. I think we evolved, as Ben was saying, to feel safe through connection, through community, through connection in which we feel safe, right? And if that's how it's supposed to work, that when we're struggling, when we're having a hard time, when we're brokenhearted, when we're overwhelmed, when we're sad, we're designed like, and when I say designed, I mean by like evolution, right? That's what happens when you're a baby. You cry, you're in distress. Mom picks you up, dad picks you up, holds you, cuddles you, and you feel safe. You feel better. And that's how we work as adults too. But if you've got this idea, if something's happened in your development or in your how much you buy into this kind of masculinity stuff, like I have to be individual, I have to be strong on my own. If something keeps you from being able to feel safe, being able to connect with others and to feel safe that way, then I think, you know, if you can't join them, beat them. You know, so if I can't feel safe with you, then better that I have more power than you, that I be more powerful, more influential, have more money. And I mean, we see this. Why? I mean, we look at billionaires. Why does anyone need to have $1 billion? Right? A lot of the problems in the country right now and in the world are driven by this huge economic inequity where the rich, more and more of the money is located up here in these few people. And then you've got this huge, massive amount of people who literally can't afford to live, like can't afford just to buy food, pay for their shelter, like on a month-to-month basis. I mean, you know, I think people think of millionaires kind of like billionaires. Well, a million seconds ago, like the early 90s, you know, or I'm sorry, a million seconds ago, it was like, you know, 6 months or a year ago. a billion seconds ago, it was like 1993. It's a
Right.
huge difference.
Scale.
Why would people want to accumulate? Well, I think it's all part of it, right? If I can't feel safe with you, better that I be more powerful, more money, more guns, more influence, whatever. And so I think part of what drives this is that we have generations of men who struggle to allow themselves to feel emotions other than anger,
Yeah.
because maybe we associate those things with weakness or vulnerability, and who struggle, I think, relatedly, to connect with people, which is what we have to do to really feel safe. And so if you don't know how to do the things that help you feel safe, then when you feel all the difficult emotions, you can't soothe. You don't feel better. There's nothing you can do to sort of soften it. And so you do the next best thing, which is engage in these threat regulation strategies. I'm going to buy a bunch of guns. I'm going to, distract myself
Threat
by
regulation
certain porn. I'm going to
strategy.
do, yeah. But there's a difference, and this is really important in compassion-focused therapy. A big distinction, and Paul Gilbert, who created CFT, talks about this a lot. There's a big difference between feeling safe and feeling a little less threatened in the moment. Right? We see this, for example, in the case of obsessive compulsive disorder. Right? In OCD, you've got someone who maybe checks the stove 300 times a day to make sure that it's not on, because they've got this intrusive thought that says, I'm going to burn down my house, even though they don't cook. Right? But they've got this threat that's there all the time. And why do they check the stove? Because while they're checking the stove, they feel a little less threatened. But they don't feel safe. And so as soon as they're off doing something else, the intrusive thought comes back, the fear comes back, they go back and check again. Right? So it's all threat regulation stuff. I think we've got a lot of men here who don't feel safe with their emotions, who have struggled to connect with other people to feel safe. And I think that's why we end up, when you combine that with easy access to, you got to be careful how you talk about guns, because people can say, well, it's not really an assault rifle. It's not this.
Yeah.
But,
with very
guns,
deadly firearms.
yeah, very deadly firearms. And Johnny, I'm glad you brought up guns. I just want to share one story, if I could, that speaks to this issue specifically, because I think a lot of times when we talk about guns, people, for reasons we've talked about in terms of identity and others, it's easy for them to feel attacked. But sometimes I think what can help is to actually just share stories about the difference it makes. We had a school shooting in Spokane a few years ago, where I live, at a high school, literally a 10-minute drive from my son's house, or my son's school, rather, of about a 15-minute drive from my house, 10 minutes from my son's elementary school. And what happened, I was involved because I met with some of the kids to try and reintegrate back in the school after, and things like that. But what happened, we had a shooter who went into the school with an AR-15 and a pistol, a 6-shooter. And he went in the hall during class changes. And if you've ever been to high school during class changes, right, the hall's glutted, right? It's just filled with people going to their lockers, going to their next class, whatever. He gets in this hall, pull out the AR-15, and gets ready to lay down fire. And the AR-15 jammed. And so he then pulled out the pistol, emptied the pistol, injured 3 kids, and one of the other boys there jumped on him to try and stop him, and he killed the boy that tried to stop him. So there were 3 kids injured, one dead, which of course was a huge tragedy. But I want you to imagine what that scene looks like if the AR-15 doesn't jam, right? Instead of 1 dead child, you've got what happened in Texas. You've got maybe dozens. And that to me is the argument for sensible gun regulations. Because, if people say, if someone wants to kill people, if someone wants to hurt people, they're going to find a way. Probably so, right? But what we know about crime, we know lots about crime. If you make crime just a little harder, just a little less convenient, rates drop dramatically. The single best thing you can do to prevent your house being broken into? Lock your doors and windows. Thieves go, they try the window, they try the door, they can't get in, they go into the next house. right?
Yeah.
Is that called a
Get a noisy
deterrent?
dog. What?
Is that called a deterrent?
Well, I think it's a deterrent, but it's a small deterrent. It just makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah, look,
A
why
little more
wouldn't they just check the next one? Why?
Well,
Why?
they may,
Yeah.
right?
Right? Yeah, I'm just saying it
But
makes it plausible. Like that's what they do in parking lots. Car thieves, people that rob
yeah.
open cars, they go through each one and pick the one that's open. It's not about is it the best way? No, it's just if your car's not available and open, they're just going to move to the next one.
And if the weapon of war isn't readily available, maybe you use something else
Yeah.
that's less lethal,
Mhm.
that can cause less damage. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that story because for me, after that, I'm like, that's the best testament. That's the best argument I've heard for why we need to think about that.
Okay, this is fascinating conversation. I feel like it's such a hard topic. There's a lot of tension here, so I'm going to try to diffuse the tension just a little bit by doing this.
Well,
Did
that
that help?
lets
It
the
works
pressure off.
every time.
That was the rusty screen
I
door
feel
by
like
none
someone
other
just
than
picked
Johnny
my
Spaz.
armpit.
Josh and Mers would love to hear your thoughts.
Josh.
I'm still trying to hack up a lung, so just give me a minute. I'm fighting off a cold. I mean, we've had a lot of great conversation already about a lot of this, and when it comes to my thoughts on this event, I mean, it shocked me. Obviously, I mean, I was just at work. I was at work doing my thing, and I just made the mistake of opening up social media, and I have a lot of people who have their finger on the pulse of the news, and I heard about this, and I went, my exact quote was, "Oh Jesus, not again," because it's like we literally just had Buffalo happen, right? And then just after Buffalo, we had a guy going and shoot up a Taiwanese church in L.A., right? And I'm sitting there just going, I thought like 2020 and 2021 were supposed to be the two-part apocalypse, and 2022 was our gateway out. But nope, we still got some trailblazers there. And
Josh, we both have partners who are school teachers.
well, not just that. I mean,
I am a
get,
school teacher.
right.
but yeah, we
I
had
teach kids in K through 5.
yeah,
And I couldn't even imagine. And I've been deployed to war
yeah,
post 9/11, immediately after and for the remainder of my time in.
yeah,
I can't even, like, I'm a gun person. I'm a NRA life member. I am an NRA certified firearms instructor on every single class they give.
Card carrying, lifetime NRA member.
Well, to be literal, I don't
also-
carry it on me.
Who's also a school teacher. It's really
Yeah.
interesting perspective you have.
It's just, I can't fathom it, man. It makes me weepy. Think about.
Yeah.
And I'm not a soft person. I'm as hard gets in my soul. I earned it. And I don't give a shit if people in that culture don't like it. I've been there. I've been you. I've been on your side. Fought for you probably more than you ever have, whoever's listening. Okay? And if you want to talk to me about it, let's talk about it. I'll give you my email. Happily. Let's go. Was a weapons specialist in the military and a lifelong member and a certified instructor and I'm a teacher who's got a different connection like that. I don't know. I don't know if that's common. I have thoughts.
yeah. And
My
with
thought
this-
is human baby or inanimate object.
yeah, exactly.
Tell me. I want to hear people. Email me, please. I want to hear your answer. And then if you have a debate argument to make, I will listen. Because if you know something I don't, I want to hear it.
Yeah,
Not worried about that being a problem for me though. Be honest. I don't mean to dig at anybody.
no, it's all good. It's all good. And just for myself, when it came to this event, I mean, just literally, as we just mentioned, we had Buffalo happen, what, about a week or two ago? and now we just had Texas happen. And just from my own perspective, because everybody's sharing their own points of view on this from a personal relation. Ben's got a 2-year-old daughter. Johnny's a school teacher. Russell's a teacher and he's got kids. Like, from my perspective, Buffalo, where was it at? It was at a grocery store. Where do I work? In a grocery store.
Yeah.
So I don't like to have the idea. I already had it with COVID. I never had it, but just that threat of anytime I could walk into that store, I could bring home a plague that could kill my family.
For that, really, and that's the job you're working. You're like, this isn't my life right here. I'm working, on my way to my goals. Like, I'm gonna die for that.
No, absolutely not. And then when it came to the shooting thing, okay, so a guy went and shot up a grocery store, and I've had, at least in almost the 8 years I've been with this company, which is a pain for me to say out loud that I've been with this store for 8 years, but in like 8 years, we've had at least 3 or 4 times where we've had to have a sit down and watch a video from the University of Texas about what would happen if a shooter went into your facility, right? And you had to either run,
Y'all
hide,
are trained for this.
fight. I had to basically be trained as far as, well, the union will want you to run and hide, but they want you to fight. And I'm like, well, we'll see, right? So I don't like the idea of, I go to work and I already have enough problems as being a grocery clerk and dealing with the Karens of the world as is. That's enough for a lifetime therapy session
that's
right
Karen
there.
breeding ground, bro. That's the
absolutely.
Grounds. More like proving grounds. Sorry.
I mean, we have a little button for if somebody needs to get to the liquor case and it goes, liquor needs assistance, and I go, no, that's me. but not really. But then
Afternoon highball.
no, I am not my grandfather. No. But when it comes to
mid-morning highball,
no, maybe. But when it comes to that, it's like, okay, now my work is now potentially a dangerous place. Thanks. It was just like when I read about, the Pulse nightclub shooting that happened back in 2016. The guy initially wanted to try and hit Disney World. And it's like, really? Yeah. So now I got to feel like my, the happiest place on earth could be a literal kill zone. That's uncomforting. And now we had a school get shot up, and my girlfriend is an elementary school teacher. It's what she wants to do. So now I already had the fear that she's going to bring home, which I love her to death. She did already. Brought home a cold from those little rugrats that both of us had. I'm still dealing with it, but I love her. It was out of her control. But then also, now I'm scared that, what happens if she gets caught up in a meeting and it's like 4:30, normally I get a text message, or 4 o'clock. I get a text every time on my way home if I have the day off. What happens if 4:30 comes around, I don't hear anything? Well, now I'm going to start getting concerned, right? That, it's not, she's got a kid meeting because the kid's not on a program, or the parents forgot to pick him up or something. She may not be alive, which just saying that out loud is making me really uncomfortable. That, and at the same time, I got a 12-year-old sister. I saw her literally grow up, and I have that trauma of, what if this sweet, innocent little girl, who is no threat to anybody outside of a box of McDonald's French fries, is ending up dead because somebody was having a bad day. She's in middle school now, in high school. And just the fact that my little sister's growing up is scary, because now she's got to deal with boys in every single way. So I'm like, Jen, don't, if someone asks for backseat bingo, you say no, right? That's the conversation I want to have, not remember to duck and cover and aim for the jugular, right? I don't want to do that, but it's terrifying, especially when she's going to go to a high school. Same high school that I went to, where guess what? In 2012, there was a stabbing. And the person that attacked was actually just around the corner from my house. I walked the same pathway that this girl did. And what did she do? She waited. She was bullied. She was harassed, neglected. What did she do? She waited in a girl's bathroom with a kitchen knife and attacked 2 students. Thankfully, they're alive and they were only injured. But just still the threat is real. And that's terrifying to me.
Living in fear is like the worst thing ever. It affects every part of you. And you will not be able to function, like trying to run a marathon in like a very Miami climate or the Sahara Desert.
Mm-hmm.
It's that fear, it just bogs everything down.
And in my case, go ahead, Johnny.
yeah, it's just it seems to me like it's almost surgically feared, since
Yeah.
we're not willing to do anything about it. So why the only reason someone that I could conceive of that wouldn't want you to do something that helps people is because there's an agenda associated. But I'm not
Yeah.
going to talk conspiracy. I'm just looking at the behavior, cause, and like, what is this? What's the relationship?
Yeah. And when it
There
comes
is
to
one.
and when it
You got
comes
to
to
think about
fear,
it, you know.
yeah.
But
When
when
it comes to
someone tells you how to think on an emotional topic like this, sorry, Josh,
oh, go ahead.
but when someone targets you emotionally like that, I was an Alex Jones groupie. Oh, I got to throw up a little bit. Seriously.
Yeah.
He knows exactly how to play that game of control and manipulation, and I couldn't sleep without it. Like a heroin addict needs heroin.
And that's fear. This threat regulation.
Yeah. And what is
I
the saying from Star Wars? Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate.
There it is.
Hate leads to suffering. And I was fearful for a long time. And exactly. And just because of the fear and my
Excellent.
genetics, I get angry.
Yeah.
Where instead of me thinking about someone comes into the store and shoots up, what do? Well, I gotta hide. I gotta think. My mind went from, oh no, what would happen? I go, I wish to be like Sam Jackson. I wish a motherfucker would, right? And that's not a healthy thing to do. That is not a healthy mindset. I don't want to go to work thinking I'm about to go into a fight. I want to go to work thinking I'm going to go get a paycheck, and the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to have some milk spilled on me. Oh, boo-hoo. And then I get to go home. Right?
Well, that's what the milkman's for, right?
I am the milkman.
Square 50's guy, I miss the days when the Red Menace was the thing that we were supposed to be scared about. Not our own domestic terrorists here.
Right. But isn't it interesting? It's interesting because we live in this country where, how is this country formed? We had to have civilians arm themselves to fight invasion. That invasion ended how long ago? And we never had it since. So why are we still having civilians arm themselves thinking there's going to be invasion when the only invasion that's happened recently was in Ukraine? Why do we still feel the need to continually grab? I got guys at work who talk about they got X, Y, Z, a list about a mile long of all these weapons. I'm sitting there and I don't say anything, but I'm still going, why? My dad has a pistol just for a home defense, but he never uses it. That thing collects more dust than it does kill counts.
Yeah.
But why do we need all this? I don't understand.
Well, since we're going to go to the Constitution, it sounds like the founders, guns, the Second Amendment specifically, the big debate in Congress about the Constitution when they were ratifying it and getting it ready to go between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was that the federal government had total legal authority over the army and militia. And since at that time before the Civil War, it was a dual federalism system where you had the states were essentially as powerful as the Fed. The states did not like that the army and militia was controlled by the federal government. And the federal government, so the counter to the federal government having the control over the sword, if you will, right, the army and the militia, was that the citizenry would not be disarmed. The discussion was, or the only real disagreement between those two issues, that the federal government control the army and militia and that the federal government should not have any authority to disarm the citizenry, was whether or not an armed population could adequately deter federal oppression. So that was the discussion at the time of the Constitution between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists.
Damn, Mers. How do you know all that stuff?
Mers carries a pocket Constitution.
I love it. That's great.
I do. I carry one in my wallet. I can go get it.
I
if you
don't
want
doubt
me to
it for a
get up to my
second,
desk.
buddy. I
It's how
love
interesting to get with the ladies at the bar. It's like, hey, you want to see something cool? Whip this out instead of something else.
You know what's funny? I
Knowledge.
take it out in the bar all the time.
That's
Of
great.
course you do.
I've seen you do it,
all the
Murs.
time.
Murs, that's
I
great.
have seen you do it.
I think you and Ben
Witness.
have both seen me do it.
Murs, you're everything you present to be, bro. I love it. It's the best.
Murs, what's your take
you're
on
an
all this?
authentic person, and I love you, buddy.
Well, I just don't have a lot to say about any of this right now.
Okay.
I said what I had to say.
All right.
Fair enough.
Respectful.
Yeah, man. No worries.
Well,
I am impressed by your historical knowledge, Murs. So,
Thank you. Appreciate
on
that.
a serious note, that's awesome, man.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would say, I guess I could add one more small thing. My parents are both retired elementary school teachers. My brother was a school teacher. There was a shooting at the school that was the next school over where I had friends and dated a girl and whatever from my hometown, which is a small, literally the cow fields butt up against the fence, right? It's not so much anymore, but when I was growing up, it was very rural, right?
Still
So
is.
it still is to an extent. There's a lot more houses. There's a lot more bedroom community, if you will. But anyway, you get the idea. So when this was all happening and there were various solutions put forth, like armed teachers, right?
Mm.
So, boy, I hope my dad doesn't get at me for this. I guess it runs in my blood to be passionate. So my dad went down to Olympia and got into it and almost got kicked out of our state capital because one of the legislators had put forth a bill to arm teachers. And my father said, absolutely not. That gun will be taken from 90% of my colleagues.
It's a valid
And he
point.
got loud and used against them and the kids.
I agree with that 100%.
And he got very loud and passionate. And I believe was asked to leave. He's a 4th grade teacher. He is a stoic man. He is why I carry a constitution and why I know those things.
Why you know it
So
so
if you
well?
forgive me, that's really all I got.
No, you're
Thank you for
good,
sharing,
man.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate everything you guys are saying, but particularly creating this space. Some of you may not know this, but we had planned to talk about mental illness and stuff today. That what you'll be doing on a later episode. And I kind of emailed Ben this morning. I was sitting in my office getting ready to go to class, and it all just hit me, and I was just overwhelmed with just like horror and sadness and grief and anger and all of it. And I emailed Ben and I'm like, I'm happy to log in, but I don't know if I'm going to be useful for anything today because I'm just overwhelmed with all this stuff. And I think I appreciate you creating space where we can all feel all of that stuff and acknowledge it and talk about it, because I think that's one of the things that men don't do that contributes to so many of these problems. We don't create space for the sadness and the grief and the horror, and then maybe we channel it all into anger and rage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For me, working with children has really helped me reconnect myself to that ability. I think we lose it at some point, or it becomes so numb that we don't know it's there, or something like that. And I know I say that coming from one side to another. I don't know how to classify which is which, or if the words about it, other than to distinguish there are two, would even matter. Right? So but you can assign anything you want to either side of that, and everything in between. And I think about it too, and people don't. They take that our ability to be compassionate with somebody, like we joke a lot here, but there's nothing I want to say to anybody here that would ever be intentionally harmful to hurt that person in any way. And sometimes it's miscommunicated, and when it's miscommunicated and people aren't even aware it's there, let alone bridging the gap of the healthy thing to do versus the instinctual thing to do. I'm not going to say bad. I'm going to say instinctual. To me, that's like default position on a lot of stuff. And I'm only aware of it because of things I learned in education. I didn't realize things that I felt had labels already. Like people already figured it out. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is a thing. This wasn't just occurring in my brain. There's actually something that like people have done studies on this. Wait, this is like 80 years old. They knew this the whole time.
Yeah.
But how many steps does it take to get to that? From where you feel identified with someone that you think is attacking you to bridging the gap of like the ultimate healing. Where's the intermediary? I have no idea. All I know is that that's the way I see it. It's what makes sense to me. And I have an intuition about that before I had an education about that.
Yeah. I think one of the first steps is just being able to acknowledge what you feel. I've talked to a lot of men about, you ask men questions, and not just men. I mean, women, other folks too. Sometimes you'll say, well, what did you learn when you were growing up? What did you learn about emotions and how to handle them? What did you learn about what to do when you're sad or when you're scared or when you're angry or anxious? And you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, how many guys respond back saying, I don't actually remember ever hearing my parents even say those words.
Mm-hmm. I've been there, brother.
Afraid or anxious. Like we didn't even use emotion words. That wasn't no one. It was, you'd see people express it in different ways, and some in appropriate ways and some in really scary ways. But for many people, there was never even a conversation. What do you do when you're scared? What do you do when you're sad? How do you handle it when you're heartbroken or you're filled with grief? And if you don't even name it, right? How are people supposed to learn how to handle those feelings?
Yeah. But before you get naming it, Russell, let's touch on your point to being even aware it exists.
Yeah.
Some people don't. Yeah. They ignore the flags. They say there's an old adage like the universe is always listening if you open your ears, some kind of version of that. You know what I mean? Saying like everything you do matters, everything you self-talk, everything that you say out loud, and it conditions people to kind of like incentivize them to be pro-social. And you could break that down to kind of an evolutionary perspective. But if people can't just, I think, lead with compassion and kind of trust your gut before you trust things that you've heard, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. Whatever the thing is.
I think it's a fun exercise to look up an emotion wheel.
Yeah.
When I'm in the emotion, because it starts at the middle, right? Yeah. And they're basic emotions. Are you happy? Mm-hmm. Are you sad? Are you angry? Are you upset? Whatever. And then it branches out. And as it branches out, you get more and more words to use to describe to yourself what you're feeling. And once you get to like disgusted instead of angry, or anxious instead of afraid, you can begin to really screw down on what you are feeling, where it's coming from, and what is the opposite of that, and how do you keep yourself from being disgusted. let's take it down a notch from disgusted to despaired. Let's take, and I don't have it in front. It's on my wall behind me, but
It's an
green
easy-
screen, it's hard to see it.
Yeah.
With this dumpster
And
fire
Mers,
going on behind me, it's really hard to see the emotion wheel.
It's an easy way to be
but-
moral too. And go ahead, Russell.
Oh, I was just going to say, going through that exercise actually helps you work with the emotion. There are actually studies that show that actually just naming what you're feeling with regard to threat emotions like anger or fear or anxiety, actually there's a little almond shape structure in the middle of our brains called the amygdala, which is fires up. Well, what the studies show is if you say, the moment you say, I'm angry, actually the amygdala activation that corresponds with the anger gets turned down a little bit.
Yeah.
It softens the feeling. Just naming it, just acknowledge this
You're
is what I'm
labeling it.
doing right now, softens it. It helps us work with it. That's the first step to sort of, as Johnny was saying, to notice something's happening here, to notice that's a feeling. And then the next step is like, okay, what am I feeling?
And how does
I think that emotion wheel helps with that.
how does the cognitive bias fit into that model, right?
Well,
Like what does it do when you add this chemical to that chemical? These two chemicals might be good together, but as soon as you add this thing, it's like a crazy reaction.
I think it changes the neural pathways too, doesn't it? Or am I totally off on how that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not a neuroscientist, and so one of the things that's important to me is not to speak beyond my expertise.
There's an argument to be made for operant conditioning. There's an argument to be made for some sort of operant conditioning.
Oh, there's all kinds. There's always.
But if you're gonna how deep do you take that, and does it matter? I don't know. These are all good questions, I think.
It's not the last time you're going to say that. How deep does it go?
Hey. Oh boy. Had to get it in there. Hey.
Last time you're going to say that. Certainly not the last time I'm going to hear it.
Oh boy.
It just keeps going, doesn't it?
Hey.
We got to get a few in, don't we?
Oh no. That's how we shut him up.
Okay, we got to wrap things up. Dr. Kolts, really grateful for you to be here for this conversation. I appreciate you always bringing in the perspective of empirical data and what actually are proven practices and schemas to approach life as a healthy man, trying to be the best men that we can be. You mentioned earlier, is that your wheel of emotion?
Hers is an emotional turkey.
You can't really read it. I had to stretch it to fit. But what did you say?
Mers is an emotional turkey.
And it's turkey mating season.
Oh no.
Somebody from Oklahoma would know that. I mean, that's just.
I've got him in my backyard in Spokane.
Oh no.
Male turkeys. Come on.
Oh dear.
When I'm walking around the streets and I make that sound, I got to be careful because it's so realistic. I might get assaulted by some random turkey, so I got to be careful. But Dr. Kolts, you mentioned earlier your appreciation for the space that we've created to be able to process the anger and confusion that we might have around the senselessness that's been happening. And that really makes me reflect on, I sure wish these individuals who felt like they needed to do that would have had the space to be able to process their anger, hate, and rage. Yeah. Because I think that is part of the solution. And there is no, I was going to say silver bullet, but there is no panacea here. One solution that's going to fix everything. Yeah. We've talked about this being not only an issue of toxicity, but also ready access to lethal arms.
And man, I got something to say, Ben. Sorry to interrupt.
Bring it.
But I have a very real sense of relief right now. Not to be gross, but you got to really go. And then finally, like, you think you're going to go in your pants. And then you finally get to it and it's
Wow.
safe. Like, you knew you. Well, stop.
That was kapoom.
Yeah. Listen, that real sense of relief. It's like an undeniable thing. Like, it's not, you don't have to be emotional about it. It's a feeling. Like, it's a different, I'm putting different words to it because it's like that feeling of relief. When I say relief in your physical form, you know it. You don't question it.
Yeah.
But people don't take the step. Like, sometimes it doesn't happen on its own. Sometimes you just let it build up and build up. And it's like, once you're buried in the coffin, or once you're in the coffin, how do you tell the difference if you're buried or not? How do you tell? If you're not moving, if you're just comfortable in your space and you're just in, sleeping position, how would you know you were buried if you didn't even think to look, let alone know where to look, let alone know how to do it once you get in there and realize that it's super hard and it takes real work? But it's easy to shit on, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny
Thanks.
Spass, for that great point. So I guess just to our listeners, if you're ever out there experiencing that anger, hate, and rage, reach out to someone, because we're all stronger together. And this isn't about every man for himself, rugged individualism. That gets us nowhere. Build your community, build your sense of safety. It takes a village, build that village.
Do it.
And
Teamwork, make a dream work.
We all feel anger, hate, and rage at times. We need to find ways to deal with that. And, step one is acknowledging that you're feeling that, as we've discussed.
Yeah, just do that. The rest will sort itself out eventually if you want it.
But at the same time, you can also do it for someone else. If you're noticing that someone is maybe struggling and they don't want to accept that, you could be that open door that they can that first step, that first door to open up into a much better tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because, you can only go so far without a tribe. Hopefully that tribe is just not of cannibals, but it's of actual caring people.
Oh, boy.
You're not going to go very far with a tribe of cannibals. I mean, that's just kind of how it works.
Talk to New Guinea and you might have a different story there, but
Did not expect us to go this direction. Okay, let's go around and do last words. Johnny Spaz.
Jeez.
Okay, profound. Square 50s guy / Josh.
Regardless of what turmoils may come, if my background says anything about it, that life finds a way, hopefully in the right way.
Mike Mers.
Why didn't the turkey eat any food?
Jesus Christ.
It's a question, a serious question. Come on, if you're going to call me a turkey, let's go.
Repeat it again.
Why didn't the turkey eat any food?
Why?
Because it was stuffed. So I just have one quote that I think gets misquoted all the time that I'd like to read. It's by Benjamin Franklin, and it gets misquoted a lot. So I wanted to read the actual quote, which is, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And unfortunately, it's misquoted, which usually gives it the wrong connotation. So
Yeah,
I
love it.
I wanted that to be a clear quote, the actual quote. As far as I know, that is the actual quote.
Feed fear a suck-it sandwich.
Dr. Kolts, last words with you.
I just like to invite any of the men listening to like get curious about what you're feeling. Like when you notice stuff coming up, and if it's sadness or fear or anxiety, instead of like turning away and try to avoid that because it feels weak, or maybe like criticizing yourself because you think maybe you shouldn't be like this, maybe it means you're not manly enough. What if you just acknowledge that, I'm a human being, and being a human being means that sometimes I'm going to be sad or grief stricken or embarrassed or whatever it is. And maybe, like Josh was saying, find someone who's willing to listen and share your experience with them. And a lot of times what's going to happen is you're going to find someone who's like, oh yeah, I feel that too. And maybe they feel that sense of release that Spaz was talking about, that having the kind of space that we've created here. We can create that space for ourselves, and we create it for other people. But it starts with this acceptance that this is part of the human story, right? We all feel this stuff. And instead of avoiding it or feeling weak or turning it into anger and rage, what if we just deal with it at the source?
Yeah.
And create space to do that. And I appreciate you guys creating that space today again. Thanks.
Hey,
Thanks for joining us.
yeah, always welcome.
Anytime, guys.
Awesome. Happy to have you here, bud.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone.
I'll give you an SDJ salute.
Thanks for listening to this
Love
special edition of Sexy Dad Jokes, and be nice to each other out there.
Yeah.
And we will see you next time.
Yeah.
Don't forget the drill noises.
Now get up.